It's
Okay,
recording.
all good. Okay. Um, okay, cool. So this is going to be just a discussion about Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. Can you help me out with his second name?
Turgenev.
Do you know how to
Tur-
Turgenev? Turgenev? Okay. All
Turgenev.
right, well, Turgenev. All
Yeah.
right, yeah. Well, hopefully there aren't any fanatical Russian speakers in the comments section or anything,
But
because yeah, that might turn out badly. As much as I love a debate, but yeah. So I'm gonna read out these of the book, and then we'll just get into a discussion about the book that we've both read, and not me recently. But yeah, I'll just read out the synopsis now. Returning home after years away at university, Arkady is proud to introduce his clever friend Bazarov to his father and uncle, but their guest's outspoken nihilist views expose the growing distance between Arkady and his father. And when Bazarov visits his own doting but old-fashioned parents, his rejection of traditional Russian life causes even further distress. Okay, so that's the general gist of the piece. I'll put it up here. So, when did you start to read this book? Because I don't think you've mentioned it when you actually first read it.
I first read it on June of last year.
All
Yeah.
right, so you've had a lot of time to reconcile it and to like come to some conclusions. Yeah, so I don't know. There's just so many themes. One thing that I loved about this book automatically was that it wasn't as long as Dostoevsky's books, just notoriously are. Um, but yeah, like as the synopsis said, it's basically about nihilism and generation differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you think that you did you think it was more of a generation sort of philosophy that was going on, or like a romanticism? Because there are, to me, I feel it's also a romance, but yeah, did you pick up on the nihilism as much as I did? You know, it was quite profound and consistent. What did you think of the nihilism and so on?
Yeah, I think that of course there's like a big topic on the bridge, right, between the fathers and the sons, right? Uh, and I think one of the most the nihilistic part and the existential dialogues the book is like filled with. I think they are pretty good and pretty like when they define nihilism in like in the first pages, in the first quarrel with the uncle. I think that part was one of my favorites because Turgenev was like so consistent with their points, and the quarrel really felt like I don't know, like you can feel the bridge and how everyone is trying to point out the thing they don't like about the other, but they are trying to look for that thing, for that little thing to just like
Mm.
pinprick it, like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the dialogue, like you were just saying there, the dialogue is so good. I think this is a commonality between Dostoevsky and Turgenev. Yeah, I should really get my pronunciation right. But yeah, the dialogue and the sort of the interactions between different people in the book is really captivating. Again, like you said, was with Bazarov and Arkady, and the parents. But like, there's clearly a difference in their mode of thinking, right? And yeah, and Arkady's sort of taken aback by this nihilism doctrine that, well, I think at the time of Russia as well, which is why it was being written about, I believe, in some sense, it was quite a big problem, or at least quite a big idea. So yeah, I liked. That's true. The dialogue was really interesting. How like Bazarov Bazarov, yeah, again, excuse my pronunciation, but yeah, he clearly had his points well conceived, I would put it. And it's interesting because whilst in many ways he could have been wrong or was wrong, um, in many ways he was wrong, at least the production and the oration of what he was saying was in such a persuasive manner that it felt like what he was saying was true. But that kind of goes back to the idea of like, just because the presentation of an idea is consistent or believable doesn't mean that it's true in any regard. So would you agree that like that the kind of father and the older sort of like the uncle, I believe it is, and the brother as well, um, they hadn't really thought about their own belief systems as much as Bazarov seemed to. Um, yeah, how true do you think Bazarov's points were? Did you kind of identify with them to some extent?
Yes, I think in the first part mostly, right? Because he makes like as you said, like a very good introduction and a very good I don't know, like he just puts everything in a nutshell. I think it's like in two paragraphs he defines like almost the backbone of all his belief system, and the other guys that Petrovich brothers, they also had like, well, I think the I don't remember the name of the uncle, but I don't remember its
Well,
really.
it's all Russian, and I don't know about you, but whenever I read a Russian book, it's so difficult to remember all the names because they're just so long and
I remember
alien.
Pavel Petrovich. Yeah,
That's
they're
right.
yeah,
That's
Pavel.
right. Yeah.
He yeah, that happens in Dostoevsky where I force myself like into pronounce it correctly every time in my head so it could like fit later because yeah, but that's just like my thing, like I cannot let a word go, if I don't know what the word means, so I may know the context of where it is and what how it's used. I look for the word, so I think it's because of that. But okay, yeah. So Pavel Petrovich and the brother Nikolai, they have their belief system quite, yeah. I don't know, like as clear as Basarov, but I think it's more persuasive at first glance, Basarov's perspective.
Mhm.
The other guys are conservative and they have like more thing. Yeah, it has some kind of dandyism, right? And especially Pavel Petrovich because he is like he's always good dressed and acting like in a certain manners that it becomes like not annoying but kind of not cool as Basarov. But then
Yeah.
everything starts to settle down. Like the ideas come into the application they have in everyday life, and that's where everything goes like crazy.
Yeah, it seems it seems like even on the most simplest ideas and like conversations, there will be some kind of conflict because like the actual foundation, like for example, they talk about an academic profession, but Bazarov will be like, well, no, it's a social construct, and like it doesn't really matter in the same sense that it matters to them, um, because like he would actually, like you were saying, he would literally define nihilism like repeatedly, and he say it's literally the belief in nothing or the lack of labels, so to speak. And so yeah, like even on the most simplistic topics, I just enjoyed seeing their disagreements because like it would kind of get down to that foundation of okay, well, where do they disagree or where do they agree? And Bazarov's view is so holistic, and but also hypocritical because at the end of the day, to be a nihilist, you can't really be one because to be a nihilist is to be something, and so it isn't an absence of anything because that is why nihilism is hypocritical on face value because again, to be a nihilist, you wouldn't eat, you wouldn't value any sort of any idea or any purpose. And so, whilst I think we can both agree that Bazarov is inherently, let's say, misguided in his nihilism, I think it just goes to show that how if you can rehearse, if you can verbalize, and if your rhetoric is good enough, you can really sell any idea, not only to other people but yourself, in such a way that it becomes so true and so self-evidently true that everybody's just become confused about what really is true and how we define truth. So yeah, I think it is a big issue when we argue ourselves into an ideology that it comes to a point where it can be demolished, but we've kind of dig ourselves in such a hole that the walls to climb out of that hole are surrounded with taking that idea at its face value and believing in it in order to overcome it. So it becomes an infinite circle, infinite regression of 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 well, it becomes an abyss essentially.
Yeah, I you said something really important, and a very clever point in the last thing you said about how you can sell any idea if you have like a good enough rhetoric to sell it and to present it, and that's very true. I think, and the circle and the cycle you're talking about. I think sometimes when you're so enforced or so, yeah, enforced to think something and to believe it is true because that constitutes part of yourself, like in Basar's case is like he believes in nihilism because that makes that ident yeah, that is his identity, nihilism, so he cannot deny his own identity, so he would like to, but he cannot. It's just simply, it's quite hypocritical. But at the same time, in I don't know, he tries so much to believe that it is true that he cannot see the reality that is surrounding him, and then the reality is that it cannot be. You cannot live like in a society or live in a fulfilling way, and when some feelings like when he goes the to his parents' house, he cannot like just let off this layer of being a son, of being someone that is loved, and
Mm.
his nihilism cannot deny even that because the human nature in that case is way more powerful. It has millions of years developing. Well, not millions, but in our species is like, but that bonds are for millions of years, but in our species they are so long, and they were just like, how do you say, like hardwired even before our species were even existed, but that thing, that nature that comes within us and makes us like feel something for our parents, or yeah, or so on, people like you love, that thing is way more powerful than whatever you want to believe. Just like in Crime and Punishment, right? Like, even if you think you're something, there's like a nature and something within you that you don't even know because you're fucking 20 years old, 40 years old, whatever. You will never fully comprehend what's inside you fully. So
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that kind of, it's a really interesting point because it's sort of touching on unrealized potential, I guess you could say. Like, you're convinced of yourself not being something or being something, but then there's something in you that manifests in a very Freudian or Jungian sense, that you feel surprised at manifesting or at its being manifested. And so it's, yeah, it's with nihilism for Bazarov, it's it's a belief system. It's a perspective that betrays the nature of what it means to be human, because humans can't inherently, or they can't productively, or they can't live, so to speak, by believing in nothing. By I mean, it's again, this is why it's hypocritical, because it quite literally does not work. A human is a human, and a human needs certain, well, it needs to meet certain instinctual desires, and again, this goes back to religion, how ideology, you know, loads of different political stances, they all build a character, and they all reinforce the character of that person. And so Bazarov, through the book, I mean, he talks about politics a bit, you know, he talks about all these things, and about his likes and dislikes, and again, the presentation is immaculate, but really it's all mouth, no trousers,
Yeah.
essentially. It's yeah, I think there are a lot of speakers actually who are such great orators, but and anyone can be transfixed by them because of how well they speak. But when you actually dig into what they say, the substance doesn't exist there.
Yes, I think it's very important to mention that part of the characters about how they present it and how they develop, as you said. Because, for example, Arkady and Arkady and his father, as well as Katya, they are like prosperous in some way of thinking. They're young. They're kind of their boldness and their, I don't know, like they're so pure. They're not trying to be anything. They're just following what's look interesting in that moment. Like Arkady may represent like the youth, like the pure youth that comes into an idea and see that that idea is interesting, but they don't have the experience of that thing being developed and how it can fail. So you may think something is really cool, as you say, but it may fail because it's not possible, because you're not taking into account all that baggage that comes within our DNA. You can say. And yeah, for example, the other characters like Basarov, or the one that I don't remember her name, but it was the widow that he falls in love with. They go to her house.
Right.
Anna Sergeyevna, I think it was, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I probably can't help you out with the names. To be honest, I
Yeah.
mean, literally, you're remembering them even better. I mean, I know you've got your book kind of flicking through, but literally, like, even pronouncing them is difficult for me. Yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of a sidetrack, but yeah, literally, like, I had to go back and like sort out descriptions for each of the characters. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, continue.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't.
So yeah, Anna Sergeyevna and Basarov, they are like so yeah, their characters are their essence is sterile. They cannot go and procreate and be, yeah, like prosperous and as Katya and Arkady. That, well, I don't spoil that. I won't spoil that. But these
Mm.
these two characters, they come like in pairs sometimes. But yeah, it's just important to see how the way they act um, have a consequence, a really important consequence on how they will spend the rest of their life. Because if like it's like so tragic that the one of the part of the last mention of Basaro, but I think that it's trying to represent that same nature of his character, and how he, yeah, how it's almost impossible for him to love. And so Ana
Right.
Serguerna is finally at the end trying to do so, and he tries, but when he's rejected, he kind of that reaffirms his nihilism, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, it becomes like a cycle that he cannot be aware of, but be just, or maybe be aware of, but instead of trying to yeah to be to get off that cycle, he just yeah, like when you're in a wave, like a wave is coming and you just roll with
Mm.
the motion, and yeah, he's just being pushed by the forces that he cannot yeah, he cannot go away if that forces, like the forces that
Yeah,
are
he can't control the disposition that's being set upon him.
yeah.
And yeah, and we will we will talk a couple spoilers towards the end, but yeah, but until we do that, yeah, I mean, one point I will add, because I also want to get your view on nihilism, and we can talk a bit more about that as an idea. But yeah, it seemed to me that Bazarov he valued his ego more than he did his instinctual drive. And on the face value, the Stoics will tell you that this is a good thing, but in some regard, um, ignoring your instincts is a very bad choice, because whilst following your instincts doesn't give you as much conscious control, at the same time, it has to be used in translation with your conscious decisions. They have to be both used together, and not to create a caricature of Stoicism. But I think Nietzsche's right about this as well. I literally just filmed I filmed a short kind of analysis of Nietzsche's short aphorism on Stoicism and the Stoics, roughly speaking, and um, and yeah, I think that like the Stoics in some way advocate for the conscious thought to be prioritized, or at least the controllable thoughts to be prioritized, and the instinctual notions of oneself to be pushed aside. And I have to agree with Nietzsche and say that we have to focus on both. We have to focus on both the instinct and the conscious action itself. Because if we do one or the other, then if we're a full-on stoic, then we're a robot, right? In some way, we're not really showing a part of us that is human. But if we're too instinctual, then we'd just be equivalent to a non-conscious, non-human animal, right? And so you have to, it's sort of my opinion that you have to be a bit of both, right? And that's what Bazarov, for me, missed out on, because love was offered to him. And whilst he could not deny its presence and he could not deny his desire for it, his ego held on to him. And, well, yeah, going into spoilers now, I guess, because I can't resist it. So until the end, his death, his eventual death, even at his death, he did in some way accept the love that he was offered, but then he died with a sort of, well, he was trying to go half and half, but obviously this wouldn't. He was on the face of it rejecting the love, in spite of he wanted his ego to be maintained, because throughout the entire narrative of the piece, he's advocating for nihilism and how love is weakness and um, and um, and this sort of idea. So when the chips are down, I think it's difficult for a nihilist to really be a nihilist. I
Yes.
really think that.
Yeah. Yeah, as we have been talking about, it's just kind of incompatible with, well, it can be like this hypocritical compatibilism, like it can be in some way living life through a whole, because eventually I think nihilism leads to clinical depression. I because of the thoughts, and
Right.
sometimes I remember a meme that was so, yeah, I laughed a lot when I saw it, because it actually it's kind of true, because it represents how the thoughts are, yeah, are messing then with the biochemical balance of our brain, and with the and not only with the biochemical balance, but also with the, yeah, with the rewards you're taking from life, and that keeps you going, like they boost you to go another 10 steps forward. And when you stop having those rewards, then you feel stuck. And when you're stuck, life is not static. Life has like a rope in your ankle, and it's pulling all the time. So if you stop and you don't have like the side, yeah, I think that's a word, right? Sight, like
Yeah. Yeah, like
seal,
an end
seal.
goal, or a skill.
That's a,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like if you don't have the seal to go forward, then you will, if you keep standing in a point, it, the road will just keep pulling into an abyss that it's just right there, like not more than 100 years are, and the database is, like if the rope is like kind of the years you're passing by, and the suffering and the, yeah, inevitable illness or suffering in life, I think it's a good thing to accept it, as you say, like Stoics do. But I think I'm more in the Nietzsche's uh, band, because it's not as he puts that in another one, in the Birth of Tragedy, that Socrates, for example, he set an example of Apollonian behavior, like how you're going to behave to control yourself and to be the one that leads your future, and don't get drowned into, yeah, yeah, like into the feeling of Dionysiac, like, yeah, behavior. Like I don't know how to say that, but it's like yeah, I know, like Dionysian conducts. I think they are more like, of being drunk into the mass, and being drunk into the instincts, like you're not even thinking what you're doing. I don't think if you go that way, you will fucking be a horrible human being, as you said, like not even a human being maybe, but
Mm.
almost not a human being, because you're just like a non-conscious animal, as you said, non-conscious, non-human, you said it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, that's not the way, but the other way around, like to try to be God, to try to be Apollo, and try to
Right.
think that you can really fix all the world, and that you are, yeah, like, I don't know.
Übermensch.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just stupid to think that you're more than just a human. You-
Yeah. I mean, it kind of grants a certain amount of humility, I suppose, and I think that's why it's difficult for a lot of I don't know, sort of sociopathic or narcissistic people because they have to impersonate body language and emotions from their observations of other people, and so you know they don't experience the same, or they don't experience what it means to be a genuine average sort of human, emotional human. And with that emotional capability, there's with empathy, there's a lot of humility involved, and it means that you can kind of there's less risk of being solipsistic in a way, because you're not sort of thinking it's all about me and I'm in the center of everything. I prefer the Wattsian view, Alan Watts, which we are a part of the universe. We are not separate from it necessarily, but we're a part of it. And so our interactions have, let's say, obviously this would lead to sort of the secular morality argument sort of thing, but I'm not going to go into that. But basically, a beneficial act, a universally beneficial act, is a universal and infinite good, basically. So, for example, what Hitler did, I would argue, is an infinite negative in many regards. Now, that isn't to kind of sweep the whole floor and to say like everything like anyone does is either good or bad, but there are certain things that have an infinite regress that cause, for example, like a family of a Holocaust survivor, or non-survivor, or even both. And so there's my point is that there's an infinite regression of a negative spiral, and so yeah, I think viewing yourself from this Wattsian view that you're part of the universe and not separate from it is, as I said, it offers a huge amount of humility, and I'd say existential clarity as well. It doesn't again separate yourself from everything else. You are embedded with the good and evil, however wish you want to define it, but you're inherently embedded within it.
Yeah, we have all the devils inside of us, and we cannot. If you try to deny it, and if you try to believe in this new age mysticism, like I think you will fall into living in a fantasy, and I think now, like for example, I remember reading the fact of that they made some studies on if you take some water of the drainage of London City, like just take a sample, and you test and you try to find antidepressive drugs, they are even detectable in the sewer. Like how the fuck, how the fuck, all the how many people are depressed nowadays, and now even more with the pandemic. Like how if you try to believe if you are depressed, maybe you're trying to get out by believing a fantasy. So that's maybe one of an important hit of new age mysticism, because
Mm.
it may be some parts can be partially true, and they were embedded with some really nasty bullshit, so they they try to make reality more like a fantasy and more like a reassurance of, oh, everything is gonna be okay, you're light, and you are and no, you're not only light. You're not a light being. You can be the most nasty human being in the whole world,
Yeah,
or you can be,
exactly, man. Exactly.
and you're not even so separate from Hitler, so you may like to. That's dangerous, when you say like, oh, that the person is awful. How can a human being be like that? Well, you're not so away,
Yeah, man. Yeah.
you're actually pretty close when you try to put a figure and try to say that's inhuman. Yeah, well, if we talk in a moral sense, maybe it will be inhuman of the maybe with the imperative Kantian view, like imperative category.
Categorical imperative, yeah.
Uh, yeah, because
Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, it's like categorical imperative, right? So yeah, that will not bring so many good into this shithole we're all in, but it will mess everything. more than it is. You will make Earth more hellish than it's and than what it is. Because it's tragical the thing we're living on. So like right now, like who you're not even maybe I don't know how the restrictions are in your country, but in so many countries they cannot even see you cannot see your friends or maybe your family. If you live alone, you're so drowned into.
Yeah, it's been like that here. Yeah, I mean, there's restrictions are easing off right now, but yeah, I mean, yeah, there are reasons for that, and there's counterpoints for that. I mean, it's definitely true that nowadays the sewers are quite literally full of the pain of its people. The pain is condensed into the society, or the different sorts of societies. Um, yeah,
But
so yeah,
yeah, but
yeah,
back to the point, all these bunch of uh, things I just said were just to complement the fact that um, you cannot really rely on what you can think about yourself that much, or
mm,
how, or what do you think you are, and try to live in a fantasy of an identity. Because as you said, we're all part of the whole, right? Yeah, a fraction of a whole, and
yeah,
you are not really separate from it, but you need like some kind of contrary beliefs. Like you may need like a conductor, for example, or a concert pianist. You may need like a very strong self assurance to go into the stage and perform something, and it needs to be flawless. Like flawless, and you need to have that confidence to go and say, yeah, I practiced enough, I can go through it. But at the same time, you cannot put yourself that much into the music, but you because you can get lost in it. So you need like that whole like two very of opposite things, like a very strong self assurance and a very strong modesty to be like separate from the piece you're performing and trying to know how much you can interact with it because and that's the point. I think you need to have both of them, like the individualism of the Apollonian view and to feel part of that whole of Dionysian view. You need kind of both of them, like in a in a partial equilibrium, in a dynamic equilibrium, and trying to cope with it, right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, no, when you were talking, by the way, great analogy. I like the music analogy. I mean, I think music is, I mean, we can't even go into it now because it will be, maybe for another time. But the psychology and the philosophy of music is something that, well, you probably know more than me about that topic. But yeah, great analogy, and that's true. But I was thinking as well, that sort of Jordan Peterson talks a lot about potential of or capacity, the capacity for people of their good and evil side, right? And when I first started listening to him, he recommended actually one of the first books that I read from his recommendations, or maybe the first, was Ordinary Men by Christopher R. Browning, I believe. Remains to be one of my favorite books. And essentially, that deals with the question of how can these ordinary men commit such atrocious crimes? And it goes back to what you were saying. If we all regard ourselves as a weaponized machine, we can then realize that our capacity for good is even more admirable than it was before. Because if we know our capacity for doing bad, then when we do anything good, we can realize, wow, I've refrained from this temptation, that temptation. I've done something that many would regard as a difficult feat to overcome. And so I think, yeah, we both agree on that. Like, when we take into account our capacity for good and bad, instead of just our good or the good of everything, then we can start to appreciate moral acts even more, because then we can take into account the we can take into account the opposite of what could have happened in that scenario.
Yes, yeah, and that kind of, yeah, it's just as you said, that's very true. Of, you cannot really be that identified with what you think you are. I like the musician part analogy. I said, like, you cannot really go that deep, but you need to know that you are more things. That you are uh like a battleground in war, like you have all those things fighting to be able to be expressed in yourself, that you cannot really select one of that and want that to be true, because there's a whole battlefield inside you, and you cannot uh, deny that. But you cannot, but it's not safe if you try and be like that, and you try to be that battleground, or that battlefield that much. You will fall into some very not good things, because you yeah, you need to feel part of something. You need to feel that you're something as much as the things you are, and you cannot really, yeah, go into one extreme or another. You, if you want to let yourself out of all those things you have inside, man, you'll be some creepy shit. But if you go into the other extreme of being an individual, and I am this thing, and I think everything about, yeah, and like, you're trying to see everything with one lens, and you have 1,000 lens,
Right.
1 million lens inside you. So that's the thing, right? And so you cannot really go into believing you're one thing only for the rest of your life, and not to believe, to try to be so many things, because no one will want to be around you. If you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like step.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. Because I'm just now seeing links in loads of different sorts of literature, like Steppenwolf, and also the game Red Dead Redemption, with Arthur Morgan as the protagonist, because he says to John Marston, anyone who's played Red Dead Redemption, who hasn't, it's a Western video game with a great narrative, one of the best games ever made, and the throughout the story they are essentially outlaws running for their life from a developing world of the US, and either Arthur Morgan is one thing or the other. Either he's an outlaw who commits these terrible crimes of robbery, or he's a man who not surrenders, at, uh, so to speak, but he puts his hands up to the extent of walking away from that life that, to his detriment and to everybody else's at that point around him. By walking away, he's merely doing the best thing he can. And so, like you were saying with Steppenwolf, like Jekyll and Hyde as well, this all comes back to not trying to be too many things at once. Because when you try and do that, then you become more than one person. You become many, and I do think though that everyone to some extent is a different person around different sorts of people, different sorts of friends, family. But you can't take that away from human nature, because we are a chameleon, more than others. Like a narcissist or a psychopath, more than others, I'd say they are. But But I would submit though that to an extent everybody can't help but being a chameleon because well it's more unconscious actually because we can't help but try to appease the different people that we know. We can't necessarily treat this person in the same way that we treat that person because they're completely different sentient conscious beings that have different experiences. So whilst we have to draw the line between how much of a different lens do we put on for a certain amount of people or anyone in general. I mean, do we just then revert to trying to be the most well-rounded person to every single person that you are, or do you kind of give into the submission of ending up being this different person for loads of different people? And as well, the problem is with this identity crisis, like you were touching on, is that we lose the sense of who we are. We just become a mixed bag of every. I mean, well, to be honest, I think that we all are a mixed bag of all of our experiences. I mean, you couldn't really debunk that because, like, we are a product of our past, right? We're a product of every single little thing that's happened to us ever, right? But the separation is how much of those past pieces of ourselves are we willing to be, right? And what is the sacrifice of being the person you were 10 years ago versus the person you were 5 or 15 or now? So you got to pick your poison. You got to pick your poison in some way.
Yeah, but in some sense, that baggage of past experiences will set what you will choose in yeah, like in free will and all that stuff. But I don't want to go deep into that.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, those experiences will set an essential, like an essence within you, and that essence is always before the potential. It's always the backbone of that potential that you can be. This is a very Aristotelian thought of essence and metaphysics. Like when there's a potency, like yeah, a potency of being, there's always an essence preceding that yeah, that potency. I think that's the word, but yeah. So that's a very interesting thought, and you always have that. Like you said, you're always more of a psychopath than other person, or more yeah, you're more melancholic than other person, of course, and you're more able to be you're most susceptible to depression than other person. Like as the big five,
yeah,
but yeah, I think there's one aspect of fathers and sons we should talk a lot because these it's very important the part of the historical context because actually this short novel is kind of a short sociopolitical novel.
yeah,
So that's a very important fact because they are touching a whole bunch of Russian history in this. This is like the epitome of that of the Russia of 1861. And
mm,
actually, as I told you, I read this before Crime and Punishment to prepare myself to understand to really merge with with the context, and yeah, I achieved it, and I really thank this book because I really liked it, but it's not one book that really reincarnates yourself into one person as Dostoevsky does, but one book that sets you in a very specific point of time so
yeah,
you can be like when he describes Turgenev is very famous of by his landscapes descriptions, and it's beautiful how he describes the rural parts, rural Russia,
yeah,
right?
true.
Like the travels. between the towns.
Like the Shire horse, and the amount of detail, like with the serfs as well. Like, like he was talking about historical context, the emancipation of the serfs, and like the bourgeois perception of the abundancy of them. Not that I'm in any way well tuned on Russian history, because I'm seriously not, but I've looked into it a bit, so I can understand the book a bit more. And yeah, I think, well, I completely agree with you. And this is why, obviously, the native Russian would probably enjoy this book more. I mean, self-evidently, because they would be more inclined to know of their own history than than I
Correct.
or you would necessarily. Yeah. So yeah, and I also wanted to ask you, because I was wondering this throughout. Well, there's two things. Firstly, this book seems to be like a romance in many ways, like a romance story. And also, just to add a caveat to what you were saying about the narrative, the structure, there isn't really a main character. If I had to choose, it would probably be Bazarov, or Bazarov. But yeah, Dostoevsky, like you said, is very. Whilst he does have a lot of main characters, you can tell who's the main. Like Prince Mischkin in The Idiot. Um, and then Raskolnikov, Crime and
Yeah,
Punishment, and
the
The
three
Brown
of them,
Man.
right?
So, like, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there definitely is a difference um, in the structure of the characters, and how essentially you couldn't necessarily say there is one main character in Fathers and Sons, because it's this shared experience between the few main characters, like the father, the son, and Zarov. So, and obviously the subsequent characters in certain scenes, they sort of become their own main characters at some points, which is interesting. But yeah, so going on to the romance part, I definitely felt towards the end, or the second half at least, it felt a lot like a romance novel, and that isn't in a bad way at all. Like, I liked the shift of the narrative. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think first of what you said of the main character. I think the main character here is not really a person, but it's more like what like the ideas he's trying to put in the very same in the very context of that Russia of that time. That's like the very thing he's trying to express, right? To really detail on that, because yeah, as you said, it's kind of hard. You may say that the two main characters are Basarov and Arkady, right? But it's not that clear to know who is the main character. But yeah, yeah, the part of the romance, yeah, like at half of the book, right? When they go to the town and they encounter this friend of that likes Slavic fashion and all that stuff. Uh, yeah, they come to Anastasievna, right? And they are trying. I think that the point there is trying to put the characters in a fireproof, because that's one of the things that makes us human. And whether you're a nihilist guy, you're a stoic person, you are whatever the shit you want to call yourself with, but you will always have this part of love, unless you're a
Mm.
psychopath, sociopath, whatever you want. Yeah, it's you will have that thing embedded, and you can deny that. You can't deny that. Like even like in the Stranger of Albert Camus, um, that's so cool. I like that part that even he's like the most nihilistic person in the whole fucking world, but he feels something, or No, well, he doesn't feel something. Actually, he's trying. He's like on the borderline of feeling of being human
Yeah.
and not being human with the standards we know about, right? But it's important to set that thing in like in contrast with fathers and sons, because in that part of the romance they were trying to prove that, like, how way Basarov and Arkady are away from that borderline, or that close, for example. Like, actually, you can see in that part that even Basarov is really away from that borderline. And he's just trying to convince himself that he's in the other side. But actually,
Yeah.
he feels, and he's not a sociopath. He's just a guy that I don't know, like the psychological profile is very interesting of him, but he's just a person that feels alone, for example, because of the way he has been thinking. He he's like very alone, and he's like the only person he likes, like Arkady, and maybe, well, like, besides his family, he
Yeah.
doesn't really like.
Yeah, he was compassionate to his family, to some kind of extent. Like he felt like a personal connection to them.
Yeah, that's the thing. The same thing, right? Like, yeah, it's kind of a romance, and I am not like so into romantic literature, like, or maybe like, I don't know, like Jane Austen. I haven't read that, but I would love to read it, because it's a whole different aspect, like maybe more mellow sometimes, or but I think it's part, like, of being human, to be able to understand Raskolnikov, be able to understand Bazarov, that it's more in the middle, and be able to understand Arkady, or some mellower characters that you just think they are sweet. Like, you think that they are, I don't know, like maybe even tender, like, or endearing, that the way they see the world, the way they treat their fathers, and their family. I think it's all just a part of it, and understand that in the same context of those ideas playing, and yeah, that's a great part of the book, I think, because it represents, as I said, how human you are, besides whatever the thing you want to believe in.
Yeah. Whatever doctrine you want to force upon yourself, you're always going to
That's
uh,
all.
fall into. You're always going to fall into the dispositions that possess you. Um, yeah, like I think it was Schopenhauer, well, probably many philosophers in general, but Schopenhauer, pointed out the hilariosity of how, whilst we can try and be as conscious as possible, the innate instincts will always seep into our mode of behavior, and so we can't take that away, and well, unless you unless you remove certain sections of your brain, perhaps, but that would be a bit extravagant. But yeah, I mean, you can't help but being human, even if you try to not to be. Like Bazarov extensively tries to do throughout the story. Yeah. So
But as you said,
yeah,
it's
is there any what were we saying? Sorry.
no. I was saying that, as you said, he's more forced. He's forcing himself to believe that more than
Right.
he actually that what he is actually. Oh,
Yes.
well, actually, he is. I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah. No. No. I agree. He is trying to force himself into an ideology that isn't part of him naturally. Yeah, like again, like we talked about Jekyll and Hyde, and Steppenwolf. It's this narrative of fighting different parts of ourselves. But yeah, did you have anything more to add on the overall story, or any thoughts?
Hmm. I don't want to spoil this thing even
Well,
further.
we sort of spoiled some of it.
Sounds
So feel free to unleash at this point.
okay, but I had some annotations here about that. Um, just a sec. So, but yeah, I think the whole idea of this book, we can say that how this bridge within the generation is playing with ideas that are new to say to like the ideas that are the contrast, like like the progress of knowledge. There is kind of a zigzag, and I don't know. This book is so many things in it, and I should definitely recommend this thing whatever person is interested in nihilism or interested in
Yeah.
Russian history, or yeah, whoever is
I think
willing.
I agree. I think it works against the idea of nihilism, which I think Dostoevsky and this author definitely, well, not definitely, but probably is trying to. They're probably trying to use this narrative as a deterrent against nihilism. Um, Although, in some regard, it could be seen as a caricature of nihilism to some extent, because not hard nihilism, but soft nihilism, like moral nihilism, can be viewed as being understandable, I suppose. But ultimately, it's not something that I personally think is constructive. Um, that's why I lean more towards Stoicism. Practically speaking, I lean more towards Stoicism. Um, but yeah, I think that's all um, I want to say. Really, I mean, again, there's a lot of interesting ideas within the piece. So we don't want to talk too much and basically just spell out the entire piece.
Yeah,
So yeah,
because we
I guess this is right. Yeah, for anyone who hasn't read it. So well, I suppose anyone who's still watching probably doesn't mind spoilers when they read books, I imagine. uh, but yeah, no, it is an interesting piece. I liked how it wasn't as long as Dostoevsky's books, for sure. Um, I did think in parts it was slow, perhaps, but when it was deep into the dialogue um, and the exchanges between every character, um, existentially and philosophically, they were definitely worth the time reading it and putting time into it. Um, so yeah, do you want to add anything else or?
how many stars did you rate the how did you rate the book?
Oh god, on Goodreads. Probably
Because
four
you're
actually.
critical with it. Four?
Yeah, four because I didn't do five. Well, firstly, I'm pretty harsh with my
Yeah, I know.
ratings usually. I'm pretty harsh, but I did four because it wasn't one of the best books that I've ever read, but it was definitely like really good in its
Yeah.
regard, like on existentialism and nihilism and Russian literature. Um, so yeah, I am harsh with my Goodreads ratings.
No, but actually, yeah,
But
I know that. That's
uh,
why I asked, because it's very true. And yeah, but I'm more mellow, I think, and in that aspect, I always like if I feel something really cool in the book, even if just something like in blindness, for example, there were just some parts that were crazy, but some others that were really fulfilled, like some and a scene, well, a part, a fragment where it's raining and the women are having a bath in the rain. That part, that fragment was magical, and some parts are, yeah, I'm just like not so critical as you. That's why I asked. But yeah, for me, it's also. I think it's also a 4-star book.
Right.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I Yeah, I think it's not one of the best I've read, but like you said, as long as you can get meritable pieces out of a story or any sort of art in general, or any sort of endeavor, it's still worth kind of like continuing the journey and seeing where it ends. And the end is impactful. But yeah, I think Dostoevsky, even though I don't really like how long his books are. I really don't like that. I mean, look, I understand that his books are supposed to be rereadable. I completely understand that. However, um, I do have a soft spot, as many viewers know, for short and sweet books that are to the point, and that you can reread, and you don't have to spend like a month doing it. You don't have to spend a month to like, like with a film, for example, you just have to kind of spend 2 hours, if you want to rewatch it, if you want to revisit it. With a Dostoevsky book, you have to spend like a couple months. You have to spend a couple months doing it.
Yeah,
And
that's great.
and as someone who reads quite a lot, and quite consistently, it's like, I can read his long books in like 2 weeks, sure, but like that would mean I'd have to read like for 3, 4 hours every single day. And that's not the sort of thing that I really would enjoy. So, I love Dostoevsky's works, but I just wish he didn't. Again, it is a product of the time, of course. It isn't necessarily his fault, because he got paid more for the amount of words, the increase of words that he used. But I do like this book and how short it is, how rereadable it is.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's readable, but I don't know. I think it's more. Sometimes I think it's like an experience, a good experience. You get that socio-political context, and you are able to read more books. It's like an gate. I think this book is more like a gate, a very good gate to get into Russian
Sure.
literature of the 19th
Yeah.
century. If for sure, it's a very good path to go. But it's not like I would like to read this book again, for example, as I would read Crime and Punishment again for sure,
Yeah, right. Yeah, like
or
maybe like in some distant time, like
yeah, maybe.
um I have been wanting, because well, to back up that, to read any book in a few years later, um always ends up with you gaining more from it and understanding more from the story. That is obviously something to be said. But of course, I'd agree that reading Crime and Punishment, or you know or Steppenwolf, any short book really, under 200 pages, I love the rereadability of that sort of piece.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks for having me, James.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure. I mean, we've talked before, quite a bit, and I was gonna do the review, how I usually do it, on YouTube, but it felt to me like, and I don't know, it was sort of, to talk of instincts. It was sort of instinctual, like, what should I do? I should talk to you about it, and I think we'd have a really good conversation. And well, it seems that it's come true. And so yeah, I think going in depth with this piece and its ideas was a good option, because yeah, I couldn't have done it without you. So yeah, it's been a pleasure, man.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, we should do like this kind of talks. Like record it more often. I think it would be a very good idea. And then
Yeah, well, yeah,
this was like a
especially, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Yeah, but especially on like books that we've both read and that we have so many different ideas for. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's very cool. So well,
Yeah, so I'll end it here. Thank you for anyone who's watching. Hope anyone's enjoyed it. And if you have read it, and most of you will by this point because we spoiled some of it. And yeah, so let me know what your interpretation is of what we said, and the book in general. recommend some Russian literature as well. I'd very much appreciate that. I am always looking for more Russian literature, so
Yeah.
trying to see if anything can hold up against Dostoevsky. Um, I've heard Tolstoy is I've heard Tolstoy
He's just fucking great.
is yeah. I've heard good things. I haven't read anything. I've got the death of
Yeah,
I
Ivan.
won't be remember the name. Yeah, yeah, right. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, thank you everybody, and we'll end it there. All right.